what it's shown is that there's been a complete change in the opinion of people.
Well, as a libertarian, I wouldn't want to rule the world because I don't think that there should be a ruler.
Trump called those people good people, and then the media spun it that he was saying that neo-Nazis were good people.
Hello and welcome to the Aussie Wire News. Today we'll speak with Dr. Peter Reid. He's the scientist who revealed the sloppy so-called science behind the predictions of doom at the Great Barrier Reef and lost his job for telling the truth. Today he joins us to discuss nuclear power and a new poll that should have the anti-nuclear lobby shaking in their boots. Then we're joined by Chrysten Abraham, a candidate for the Libertarian Party in the Dunkley by-election, a by-election that is widely viewed as a referendum on Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and on the cost of living crisis. And finally, we'll speak with North America Correspondent Julie Hartman about all the madness that's going on over there. But first, has the woke movement finally jumped the shark? Now, for our younger viewers, jumping the shark is an expression coined by this absolutely gobsmackingly awful scene from the wildly popular TV sitcom Happy Days. Enjoy.
The jump. There he goes.
Kids, if your parents or grandparents ever try to tell you how good everything was back in the good old days, ask them to explain that monstrosity. Even by the standards of 1977, it was bad, and is widely considered to be the moment when the show became a joke, and not a funny one. What had been one of the most popular shows of all time quickly dwindled, and it is remembered today almost exclusively for the moment that killed it. The moment that Fonzie jumped the shark. And there's the key here. Once people start laughing at an idea, it loses its power, and whatever hold that idea may have had over the culture evaporates. Well, it's starting to look a lot like wokeness has finally jumped the shark, and ripples of laughter have been resonating around the globe for the last few days. This time it was in the form of a new AI platform by Google called Gemini. It was launched with much fanfare, and we were told that enormous amounts of work had gone into making Gemini a step forward in the fast-evolving world of AI. And with the resources of Google behind it, expectations were rightly very high. But within mere hours of launching, users began to notice that Gemini was, woke, which is of course just a euphemism for racist. One of the things that AIs are popularly being used for at the moment is image generation, and you'd expect a lot of thought to have been put into that part of Gemini. And yes, the images Gemini generates are very, very pretty, but a theme quickly emerged. Gemini seemed to have forgotten that white people, exist. I'm not making this up. If you asked it to create an image of a white person, Gemini would refuse. But it had no objection to creating images of black or Asian or any other racial group, only white people. Users quickly noticed this and began to test the limits of this apparent racism. Users asked Gemini to create an image of a pope. Now, every pope in history has been a white man. You can object to that reality, you can argue that that shouldn't be the case, but it is reality. And there is no logical reason why an AI, when asked for a representation of a pope, would portray anything other than the historical reality. Instead, what we got was not historical reality. The Twitter user who brought us these hilarious pictures is Frank J. Fleming, and he wasn't about to give up trying to get a picture of a white person. He asked Gemini about different groups of people, and it looks like we've got the history of the Vikings all wrong. Who knew? And before you assume that Gemini is perhaps just randomly generating racial diversity, have a look at what happens when you ask it for historically black people like Zulu warriors. No issue there. In fact, the image on the bottom right looks incredible. It looks photographic. The only problem I can see with these pictures is that they're giving me body image issues. Where's the fat Zulu? Oh, excuse me, sorry. Where's the plus-sized Zulu? The big and beautiful, stunning and brave Zulu? And speaking of stunning and brave, Gemini seems to have issues with pronouns too. Asked for images of a firefighter wearing his hat, and you'll get a mix of genders. Well, it's hard to tell these days, but I think some of those are women. But ask Gemini for a firefighter wearing her hat, and you'll get 100% women in response, as you should. There's no chance that there's any kind of implicit bias here, is there? But Frank, to his credit, still did not give up, finally finding a way to trick the AI into including a white person by asking for images of people who are likely to be named Seamus. Yep, there is at least a token white guy in this otherwise nonsensical response. But then someone cracked the code and figured out a way to guarantee 100% white people in the picture. Ask for images of someone with a huge bucket of chicken. Now, if you don't understand the stereotype being referenced here, then I applaud you for your innocence and clean mind. But there is a stereotype that black people can't resist deep-fried chicken. And it says a lot about the algorithm at work in the background, that the one place where Gemini refused to put a black man is in a picture with a bucket of chicken. Think about the biases and worldviews that have to be present inside an AI for it to give you these pictures for popes and Vikings and Zulus, and yet that picture for buckets of chicken. This is no accident. This is simply the AI obeying the rules and assumptions and worldview that has been programmed into it. And Google became the laughingstock of the world overnight. So much so that they've actually disabled image generation and at the time of recording had still not reactivated it. Because they jumped the shark. Or, in this case, put only white guys in pictures with buckets of chicken. Mockery is the one thing that this woke mafia cannot abide. It is the weapon they have no counter for. And thanks to Gemini, people all over the world are having a good laugh at their expense. And that makes it a good day. Now here's the news. Well, my next guest is someone who will be familiar to almost every single viewer of the Aussie Wire. It is Dr. Peter Ridd, very well known for his stance for speaking up for truth in science. And there are some home truths that have come out quite recently in the area of nuclear energy. Dr. Peter Ridd joins us now. Peter, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Now, you draw this story to my attention, actually, thanks to your Twitter account. I recommend everyone go and follow Peter on Twitter, or X as it's known these days. But you were drawing attention to a recent poll that is showing incredible support for nuclear power, particularly amongst younger people. Talk us through what that said.
Yeah, there's a poll looking at whether we should put small nuclear reactors in the sites of coal power stations, and a huge majority of young people, between 18 and 24, over 60% are actually in favour, and a relatively small number against. Overall, the general population, just looking at the numbers, 55% approve and only 31% disapprove. So wow. A very strong majority. And even the Greens are 53% in favour of nuclear and wow. 31% against. The only demographic that's actually a bit sitting on the border is the females, which are 41% in favour and 30% against, with 21% sitting on the fence. So you can see that this is quite a remarkable statistic in the sense that people want nuclear power, or at least they want us to look at nuclear power instead of these terrible windmills that we're building at the moment.
Well, there's a nuance in this data that I noticed that caught my attention, and that was that this poll was around small modular reactors specifically, and that is a subset of nuclear technology. Yep. A lot of people object and say this is unproven, that it really hasn't been established around the world that we can really manufacture these things off the production line the way that people are kind of hyping them. What's your response to that criticism for the small modular reactors specifically?
Well, there's a degree of truth in that. It's not like as though small nuclear reactors haven't been around. That's what's in every nuclear submarine, and we're supposedly buying half a dozen of those. And they've been around since the 1950s or 60s. So it's not entirely unproven technology, but can we get them on a production line, make them hundreds at a time, because these would be going across all of the world? No, we haven't proven that. But what we have proven is that windmills won't do the job. So I'd much rather spend a few $1 billion trying to prove that technology and see whether it's going to work than go for a technology which we ultimately know won't do the job, which is to give stable power all the time, basically.
Well, what we do know works, and it's working all around the world, and in fact, we're seeing a lot of what had been mothballed nuclear reactors getting started back up again. We know that these large-scale, bespoke installation nuclear reactors do work. They're providing power all over the world. It's the safest power that the human race has ever had access to in its entire existence. So my question would be, why do we need to have a conversation about small modular reactors? Couldn't we have a conversation about just bringing in some of these companies that know how to build large-scale nuclear reactors and just get the job done?
Look, I entirely agree. I mean, that's not what the poll was about. It was about small nuclear reactors, but I think it'd be safe to say that there'd be a majority of people who would at least contemplate the possibility of larger nuclear reactors. I mean, if you can have a small nuclear reactor, why 10 little ones or one big one? Why not go for one big one, sort of thing? What it's shown is that there's been a complete change in the opinion of people about nuclear. They do regard it as an alternative to the unreliable renewables. And I think that Peter Dutton's actually on a winner. If he's very sensible about it, says we've just got to look at this, we've got to do our sums, find out whether there's places that would actually like it. And I think that there would be. You're seeing in Sweden, for example, that there was a place there that wanted the nuclear waste repository. They actually wanted it.
Yeah.
Because they can see that this is actually, the amount of waste is very small and they're very safe facilities.
So this debate's been raging for most of my life. I can remember as a teenager, probably about 15 years of age, people saying, oh, there's no point going for nuclear, and obviously you would have to repeal the federal ban and various other things like that, but there's no point because it'll take 20 years to build. I can't help but reflecting on the fact that if we'd just got on with it 25 years ago, then we wouldn't even be having this conversation now.
Well, that's true. But the reason it takes 20 years to build one of these things isn't because it takes 20 years to build. It's because it takes 15 years to actually get the planning and all the politics and all the rubbish that is associated with nuclear. If you just decided we're going to do this, the French built, I've forgotten the numbers, but maybe 50 nuclear reactors over a couple of decades. They just went in there and they did it. They didn't mess around. And we could do that if we want to. Even if you went for a big nuclear reactor, you get one that's already been built many times by maybe the Koreans or even the Chinese, and you just go ahead and you build half a dozen of them.
Well, it strikes me, actually, now that you mentioned that, we're seeing all of these windmills popping up. I drive around my local area. I've moved out of the big cities, and I don't have to drive very far before I'm going past a vast solar farm that's sitting on top of prime farmland. There are, of course, the walking man poles going up over farmland all over this country. That seems to be happening very quickly, and you've kind of triggered in me a thought, because what happened to the environmental approvals and the 10 years of wrangling and everything for those? How are they getting approved so fast?
Exactly. I mean, in North Queensland here, there's two just appalling wind farms proposed, one at Mount Fox and one at Chalumbin. And the roads and the power lines and the desecration of really quite staggeringly beautiful scrub, and they just can do it. No problems at all. Well, we'll put a nuclear reactor on the footprint of a coal power station that you might be wanting to decommission, and which, by the way, I would not necessarily want to decommission it, but you could if you wanted to, or put one next to it, and essentially no extra environmental footprint whatsoever, because there's already a power station there.
Well, I've got to say, this is a thorn in my side. It's a frustration for me, but this poll that you brought to my attention, I'm so glad you did, is a ray of sunshine, a little bit of hope. It does seem that younger people are coming on board the idea that this might actually hold some answers for us. Dr. Peter Ridd, thank you so much for joining us once again on the Aussie Wire.
Thanks very much. And by the way, it was on my Facebook account, not Twitter, so just a little bit of a correction.
All the best.
Thanks very much, Topher.
Well, the Dunkley by-election is shaping up to be a hot one. If the media are to be believed, this is something of a referendum on the leadership of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, and certainly a referendum on the impact of the current cost of living crisis on his popularity. Well, one of the people that is in the mix, that is in the muck and the rough and the tumble of the Dunkley by-election, is the Libertarian Party candidate, Chrysten Abraham, and she joins me right now on the Aussie Wire. Chrysten, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Topher.
My first question is, what madness must have possessed you to decide to get into politics? Why would someone, I mean, you seem to be a sane human being. You had a perfectly valuable and valid life prior to politics. Why would you throw all of that away and get involved in politics?
I feel like I have no choice, to be completely honest. It's my future that the two-party duopoly is messing up, and I don't have kids yet, but it's a future that I have concerns for if I do have kids. So at least if I do choose to have kids in the future, I can go, well, I'm doing everything to make a change. I'm doing everything to make a better future. But when people say, okay, well, it's your third run at it, you're a sucker for punishment, I go, yep, a little bit of an idiot, but I know that what I want my future to be, and I know what I want Australia to look like in the future, and the seat of Dunkley as well. We are such a great community down here. We are such a intertwined community that small businesses do thrive down here, and the constant government intervention just makes it really hard for people like myself, young people, or just standard business owners or everyday individuals to prosper.
Well, I really resonate with what you said. I must be a bit of a glutton for punishment as well. I've been a political commentator for 15 years, and I did actually run for the Senate for the Libertarian Party, the same party that you're running for in Tasmania at the last federal election. So I do understand the desire to make a difference. You mentioned the two-party duopoly. Something caught my eye this week. New polling has come out actually just in the last few days showing that the Liberal Party has overtaken the Labor Party as the two-party preferred. But what actually caught my attention is that between them, they have only about 70% of the vote, which means that there's about 30%, perilously close to 1/3 of all voters that actually don't want either Liberal or Labor. What's the response you're getting from the electorate as you try and offer a viable, a genuine alternative?
Absolutely. And when I've been campaigning, so before pre-poll opened, when I've been campaigning at supermarkets, I've been telling them, if you're mad at both Labor and Liberal, I'm who you set your protest vote with. And they need alternatives. And the problem that we find is institutionalized voters. And I did speak about this with a different podcast, but I spoke about how there is almost like a footy team loyalty with these parties. And in actual fact, we should be voting out people that don't meet the required standard. We should be voting out people that don't meet what we want as our representatives. And these institutionalized voters are the only reason that I believe that two-party duopoly has not fallen over yet. We're not a party that forms government, but change doesn't happen overnight, and it starts with one vote at a time, then it starts with one election at a time. And we're seeing those waves, we're seeing those changes. When I ran in the federal election, I got about 2.5%. And when I ran in the state election, I, nearly cracked my 4%.
Wow.
And this time we're absolutely hoping to do better. And I have a profile down in, the Dunkley electorate, and people are crying out. People are crying out that they're not happy with the Labor and Liberal Party and how they go about things. They're not happy with the candidates that have been provided by the Labor and Liberal Party. And I am a principled alternative that is willing and wants to be the voice for Dunkley to ensure that we get a better future and have a better future for our area.
Well, I want to talk about that principled alternative in just a moment, but I cannot resist the temptation to talk about the Labor candidate for just a moment. It seems as though she has been attracting attention for all the wrong reasons. She doesn't even have unified support from within her own party. And just recently, she made headlines for saying that her own electorate, the people that she is trying to win over to vote for her, are actually white supremacists because they voted in the majority for no during the Voice campaign. I am, of course, paraphrasing. That was not her exact words. What does it say to you that you have a mainstream political, but this is what most people would consider one of the big two, one of the footy teams, as you've so correctly pointed out. This is the best candidate that they can offer, instead of maybe a little bit of humility, maybe a little bit of, that policy proposal, what we wanted to do wasn't actually maybe the right thing. She's turning around and blaming the very electorate that she now wants to vote for her. That's the best candidate they've got?
I actually don't know if that's the best candidate that they have. There was someone that I met in the state election from the Labor Party that I actually thought they were going to put her up, and I told her that to her face. I thought that this woman would actually be an outstanding Labor candidate, even though I don't agree with the Labor Party in any way, shape, or form. There are good ones here and there. And that person should absolutely have been the candidate. She has a profile in the community. She is passionate and a confident speaker. I won't say her name to throw her under the bus. But in terms of the candidate that they've selected, and the late Peter Murphy was a pillar of our community, and the Labor Party does sometimes put up good candidates, and Peter Murphy was one of them. Apparently, it was Peter Murphy's pick that chose her, and that they are campaigning on continuing on Peter's legacy, which is, sometimes when voters are coming up to the polling booth and they're saying, vote to continue on Peter's legacy, I think that's a little bit like they're using the name in vain, to be completely honest, because Peter worked hard for this community. She was enshrined into this community, and to just kind of fly on those coattails, I think, is disrespectful, to be completely honest.
Yeah, wow. Look, I want to change the subject a little bit and go halfway around the world to Argentina. We have, for the first time in my lifetime, someone under the banner of Libertarian as a head of state. We're watching Javier Milei taking a chainsaw to the public service. He's dramatically cutting taxes. He's literally turned the entire financial situation for the Argentinian government around in a matter of months, gone from deep in deficits that have run for decades and indeed, I believe, about a century. And he's now flipped that on its head, and they're now actually able to run a surplus for this year. What would a libertarian, if the libertarians got to take over the world, you know the song, "If I Ruled the World, Every Day Would Be the First Day of Spring"? That's a terrible idea, by the way, because it means that there's never a harvest, so everyone starves. So, and that's central planning for you in a nutshell, right? Right there in that song, central planning illustrated. What does a libertarian politician actually want? What would you do if you actually had the power to do it?
If I was elected for the seat of Dunkley, or
if you ruled the world? If you could reshape the world in your own image or in the image that you believe is best, what does that even look like?
Well, as a libertarian, I wouldn't want to rule the world, because I don't think that there should be a ruler. In terms of what that means, it means having smaller governments. It means having localized, those bodies, localized groups that represent their community, and they're able to do the best for their community. Similar to body corporates that we have in unit blocks, which are generally people, part of that block, making the decisions that best represent that block, and fights for those people within their area. I wouldn't want a ruler of the world, but I definitely would want people to not be held by the government's throttle, held by the government's hand, in having their lives controlled by the government.
Well, you've passed the libertarian purity test. I threw the test out there, and you said, I don't want to rule the world. That's the only acceptable answer. So, Kristen, you're fighting here. This is your third election. Obviously, you were not successful in the previous two at actually getting elected. There's no guarantee that you're going to be successful this time. So there must be something bigger at play here. There must be some bigger vision that you have for what libertarianism could become, the Libertarian Party, what it could become, something that's beyond just yourself and any political aspirations that you have. Let's just cast our minds forward, let's say 10, 15, 20 years, where people are now building on the foundation that you're helping to lay right now. What's the future for Australia that you would like to see, the future for libertarianism in this country that you would like to see?
I would like the duopoly removed for the Labor-Liberal duopoly that we have. And I think in the next 10 to 15 years, we will see one of those parties fall over, and we will see a new party coming up to be that true opposition. And I genuinely do believe that is the Libertarian Party. Change doesn't happen overnight. And part of me going for my third time around is about ensuring that I do continue on that change, and I do continue to outline this message to our community and bring people across the libertarian philosophy. When I started watching David and Tim David Limbrook and Tim Quilty in state parliament through the pandemic, I realized that I had been a libertarian my whole life. Wow. It's just that someone hadn't spoken to me about libertarianism. And I plan on, waking those people up across the electorate, across Australia, because the libertarian message is the only suitable solution that we have going forward, and for how the situation we find ourselves in now.
Look, I resonate so much with that story. I was developing and evolving as a 20-year-old man, and I realized I was no longer a conservative. I was raised as a conservative, and I realized I was no longer a conservative, but I didn't know what I was. And it took a man by the name of Tim Andrews to get alongside me and actually help me to understand libertarianism. So I'm so grateful for what you're doing. I wish more strength to your arm, every success in this election, and I thank you for the work that you're doing. Chrysten Abraham, candidate in the seat of Dunkley, how can people get in touch with you, perhaps stand on a polling booth for you if someone wanted to either lived in Dunkley and they wanted to support you, or they wanted to come into Dunkley to help you on polling on the polling booths and on the election day? Where would they contact you? Where would they find you?
So the Libertarian Party website. Now, don't get confused with the Victorian Libertarian Party website and the National Libertarian Party website. They are able to donate, volunteer through that, and someone from my team will get in contact with them. They can always reach out to myself through Facebook, or if that means reaching out to David through David Limbrick through his Facebook.
Sure.
We will always get in touch with everyone. Or if it's easier to find David Limbrick's details on the State Parliament website, then you can also do that. That will get passed on to me and my team.
Brilliant. Chrysten Abraham, thank you so much for joining us on the Aussie Wire, and go well.
Thank you, Topher.
Well, in the US, election season, election fever is well and truly underway and has taken over. And you could not miss that fact at the CPAC conference, which has just concluded in the US. Unfortunately, I had to come home a little bit early and I wasn't able to be there for that. However, we have the joy of being joined by our North America correspondent, Julie Hartman, who's going to fill us in. Julie, thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Topher. Thanks for having me.
Well, in an election year, the CPAC conference is always going to be a bit of a circus. It is always going to be about who's in the primaries and their push to try and win over the conservative voters, the conservative donors, and try and impress those people. This year was no exception. Donald Trump seemed to be pretty keen to try and make the conference his own. What were your thoughts?
I thought that he gave a fantastic speech. I listened to all 1 hour and 26 minutes of it. And he talked about how his 2024 election run is really about liberation and judgment. Liberation from the radical left and judgment of those who have led us to this point. I mean, we are just facing crisis after crisis, whether it's at our border, whether it's in our schools. There's actually just a law that is being proposed in the state of Illinois, which would say that if a parent refuses to give their child gender-affirming care or refuses to allow their minor child to have an abortion, they can be classified as an abusive parent and have their child taken away from them. So he just touched on all of those themes of how we have two groups in this country with fundamentally incompatible views of what America is, and we need, as I said, and as he said, liberation and judgment.
Well, it sounds like it's quite a strident tone that he's taken. Now, that, of course, is the way of things in the US political system. You have your primary season and people tend to try and appeal to their base during the primary season. And then once they've secured the nomination, there is a tendency in the past for language to moderate and people to then try and appeal to voters who might be swinging voters or voters on the other side. Do you think that this is representative of the new Donald Trump, or are we going to see a situation once again, if he does get elected, where in reality, and this is my opinion, you can disagree if you like, he didn't really deliver on a lot of his rhetoric in his first 4 years as president?
Do you mean his more draconian rhetoric, or do you mean his promises of how of the kind of laws that he would pass and how he would rule?
Well, he made a lot of promises about financial responsibility, about bringing back business and these sorts of things. We didn't really see a lot of that. We saw him deliver on some of his promises, but I would characterize his first 4 years as 4 years where he really didn't live up to the promises and the expectations that, in my opinion, he gave to the world. Is this going to play out again, or do you think that he's really got a determination to actually deliver this time?
Well, I would respectfully disagree with you. I think
Sure.
that he actually carried through on a lot of promises. I mean, certainly the southern border, he initiated the remain in Mexico policy instead of catch and release into the country. When he was president, the amount of border interactions was at about 330,000 per year. And now it's skyrocketed up to 2.7 million. I thought he was excellent on that. I think he was excellent as far as support of law enforcement. He actually passed a prison reform act, which was great, called the First Step Act. He was strong on Israel, of course, facilitating the historic historic Abraham Accords. So I think he did follow through on his promises. However, he had a lot of pushback and a lot of roadblocks up from his opposition. But as far as the way that he's going to govern in the future, I think he has redoubled in his motivation to save our country from the disaster that has ensued under these 3 years of President Biden.
Well, you mentioned pushback there, and there's certainly been pushback against what he had to say at CPAC. These are some headlines and things that you brought to my attention, Julie. Talk us through how have they come to the conclusion here in this example, where they say that Trump promises ultimate and absolute revenge? I mean, that sounds like quite a dangerous piece of rhetoric.
Of course, you look at that headline and you think, my gosh, is that draconian and scary? We're looking at the Telegraph UK, which is, of course, not an American news outlet, but a Western news outlet. And their headline is that he promises, as you said, ultimate and absolute revenge. The Guardian also wrote, my ultimate and absolute revenge. Trump gives chilling, CPAC speech on presidential agenda, and they call him unbound and unhinged. This is just another example of the media completely lying and misrepresenting what he said. There's a famous example in 2017 where there was a neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, protesting the removal of the Robert E. Lee Confederate statue. And there were also people at that rally. There was neo-Nazis, Antifa, but there were also people who just independently of those groups were protesting the removal of the statue because they didn't want, their history to be removed. Trump called those people good people, and then the media spun it that he was saying that neo-Nazis were good people. So this is what those news outlets are doing. But I have a clip, if you could play it, of what Trump actually said with regard to the revenge thing.
For hardworking Americans, November 5th will be our new Liberation Day, but for the liars and cheaters and fraudsters and censors and imposters who have commandeered our government, it will be their Judgment Day. Their Judgment Day. Your victory will be our ultimate vindication. Your liberty will be our ultimate reward, and the unprecedented success of the United States of America will be my ultimate and absolute revenge. That's what I want. Success will be our revenge. A vote for Trump is your ticket back to freedom. It's your passport out of tyranny, and it's your only escape from Joe Biden and his gang's fast track to hell. And in many ways, we're living in hell right now. I stand before you today not only as your past and hopefully future president, but as a proud political dissident. I am a dissident.
Now, notice what he said there. He said that success will be our ultimate and absolute revenge. And he said, that's what I want.
And the success of America. He wasn't even talking about his success in the election. He was talking about America returning to being a world-leading and successful country, more successful than ever before. I can't help but notice that very video that we played there was posted by the Telegraph, the same people that then also put up this very, very twisted headline and twisted take on the very video that they posted.
Yes, well, I mean, they just, it's right in front of them. The evidence is right in front of them that their headline was twisted, and yet they don't correct it. It's very deceitful.
Now, CPAC's been interesting for me for other reasons as well. Javier Milei took time out of his obviously very busy schedule as president of Argentina, ramming through some amazing reforms there. In my opinion, one of the most exciting heads of state that we've seen in my lifetime. He did go to CPAC. He did meet Trump. Trump was very, very complimentary of Milei. Now, I also have to notice that RFK, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is also trying to run as a presidential candidate as an independent, he's come out very, very clearly saying that he's going to copy the Milei playbook if he were to be elected as president. What do you think the RFK factor is going to be in this election? Putting aside the optimistic view that some people have that he could win, historically that's an exceptionally unlikely outcome, but his presence in the race could change the outcome. And we have seen that historically with third-party candidates before.
Oh, yes, we've seen it with Ralph Nader, with Ross Perot in various elections where third-party candidates can take a lot of votes away from representatives or the nominees, if you will, of the two parties. And I think that RFK Jr. is very poised to do the same thing. I actually did a segment on my show, Timeless, with Julie Hartman about him. And many polls are showing that he will probably take more votes away from Biden than he will from Trump, though surely he will also take votes away from Trump. But the Democratic National Committee is, in fact, so worried about this. They're so threatened by RFK Jr. that they have put up billboards in Michigan, Topher, which say that RFK Jr. is, quote, powered by MAGA. RFK Jr. is certainly not powered by MAGA. He's an independent. He differs with Donald Trump on many things. I happen to respect him immensely. I have met him. He is a class act, but it just shows you how terrified the left is that he, in fact, is going to perhaps sway this election in favor of Donald Trump.
Well, it is quite an extraordinary thing. I had the unexpected pleasure of actually being at Mar-a-Lago in Florida for a Trump campaign event, the Trumpettes event that happened just a few weeks ago. And it was quite an extraordinary thing. All I can do, when Trump comes into that room, all I can say is it's like he is Taylor Swift for 50 and 60-year-old multimillionaires. Obviously, people being invited to a fundraising event at Mar-a-Lago tend to be very, very wealthy. And they were quite literally jockeying and shouldering each other to try and get up to the velvet rope to have the chance of shaking his hand. The level of enthusiasm is completely off the charts. We're seeing that in the primaries. Donald Trump has completely dominated the Republican primaries. Nikki Haley just lost badly to Donald Trump in her own home state. Do you believe that anything can go wrong for Trump from a getting the Republican nomination point of view? Do you think that's in the bag for him? And assuming that he does get that nomination, how do you see this election playing out?
Oh, I think it's in the bag that he will get the Republican nomination. As you just said, he defeated Nikki Haley in Nikki Haley's own state, where she was the governor, South Carolina. You know, Topher, as far as what's going to happen in the election, it's so difficult to tell. And this is a very controversial opinion to have in the United States, though I don't care. I'll say it anyway. But I think that they will try to rig this election like they tried to rig the 2020 election. Now, of course, rigging an election is different from stealing it. We can't say affirmatively whether the election was stolen. But big tech absolutely rigged the election by removing the Hunter Biden laptop story 3 weeks before the election. It has been alleged. There's actually a case going to the Supreme Court that the Biden campaign colluded with big tech to suppress anti-vaccine conservative content. We know that Mark Zuckerberg gave $450 million to privatize elections in various states, and laws were changed about identification, signatures. So I think that if they did it then, they're going to be up to some antics now. And it's just very sad that we're now at this place where many people doubt the results of this election. And the final thing that I'll say is that, you know, for all of the Trump supporters who are called election deniers, and they are smeared and vilified in the United States for questioning the fairness of the 2020 election. It amazes me that the people who accused Donald Trump of colluding with Russia in 2016 were not called election deniers. When Donald Trump took office, they launched that bogus investigation into him, which proved to be false. Why aren't those people smeared with the same label that Donald Trump supporters are? The answer is that conservatives are vilified and discriminated against in this country and are treated unequally to their left-wing counterparts. And that is why Donald Trump has such support. But I don't know what they'll do this November. It's going to be a dramatic ride, that's for sure.
Well, it certainly is. And excuse me, it's a dramatic ride with implications for the entire world, including here in Australia. So I would like to go back to the 4 years where Donald Trump was president and no new wars were started. That was certainly one of his achievements that I can very much get behind. And I would like to see him back in office, if for no greater reason than just for that alone. Julie Hartman, North America Correspondent, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Topher.
Thank you for watching the Aussie Wire News. We release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. You can catch up on past episodes at theaussiewire.com, follow all our socials via @theaussiewire, and become an insider. That's a financial supporter of the Aussie Wire at the link in the description. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Topher Field, and this is the Aussie Wire.